gonna deliver us, he's gonna take us home. Hold my hand, he's gonna take me back, he's gonna take me.
And then in '69, it was in Boston during his visit there in May. And in fact, this was the first evening that Giriraj Swami had come to the temple. He had met him the night before when Prabhupada Brandeis University, and then he came the very next day and immediately surrendered. So he was there as a guest. And one other guest asked, why is this material world here? So Prabhupada said, why is the rain there? I'm sorry, why is the cloud there? So the guest didn't know, and none of us knew. So Prabhupada said, because there's a need of rain. Similarly, there's a need for this material world. Just like the sky is there, from the sky comes the cloud, from the cloud comes the rain, from the rain comes the vegetation. Then eventually the vegetation is finished, the rain is finished, the cloud is finished, and only the sky is there. So Krishna creates this world temporarily because there is a need for the conditioned souls to come up to the human life and become Krishna conscious. So he made the most complicated things accessible.
And he asked that if everything comes from Krishna, then Maya also comes from Krishna. But how can Maya, which comes from Krishna, cover Krishna? So Srila Prabhupada replied that everything comes from the sun, and the cloud also comes from the sun. But the cloud doesn't actually cover the sun. The cloud covers our vision of the sun, but the sun is never covered. So then I raised my hand and I asked the question that was on my mind, that there's so many swamis and yogis, and each one claims, each one presents a different method of self-realization, and each one claims his method is best. So how do I know actually which is best? And Srila Prabhupada replied by asking another question, that what is your goal? Do you want to become God, or do you want to serve God? Then Srila Prabhupada said that if you want to become God, that means that right now you're not God. And how can not God become God? God is always God. And then he said Krishna is God. He never has to become God by meditation or yoga. And when he's playing on the lap of Mother Yasoda, he's God. When he's speaking Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he's God. He's always God. He never has to become God. Then he said that you can become godly, but you cannot become God. He said God is in your heart, and he's ready to help you. But if you, so he said, if you sow the seed of service to God, then God will give all the fresh air and sunlight to make the seed grow. You water the seed by chanting. So he said that God is within you, he's in your heart, he's ready to help you if you want to serve him. But if you want to become God, why should God help the competition?
You see, one Indian gentleman, middle-aged Indian gentleman who appeared to be like a very well-to-do businessman. So he asked Srila Prabhupada in a rather challenging way, why are you building new temples when there are so many old temples needing renovation and repair? So Srila Prabhupada didn't answer the question directly. Srila Prabhupada asked that man, who is that lady sitting next to you? So that man said, well, she's my wife. Then Prabhupada asked him, why did you get married? So the man got completely flabbergasted, so he couldn't answer. Then Prabhupada provided the answer. He said, you got married because you wanted to have children. Putrarthe kriyate bharja. One gets married, one accepts a wife in order to get children. But why get children when there are so many children loitering in the streets? And then Prabhupada explained that just as you want to have your own child, similarly devotee wants to build his temple and install Krishna, and in this way offer the temple to Krishna.
In 1967, Prabhupada, I was painting some picture in the altar room, and he called me into the greeting room. He said, I want to give you some idea for a new painting. So I thought that he was going to explain something, and then I would do that. But instead of explaining, he handed me a print. That was, for the first 2 years, I only copied. I didn't make up my own compositions. So I got a good, it's the word, groundwork in what things look like. So he gave me the picture of Narada Muni, very, very beautiful in an enchanting looking forest, and playing the clappers and the veena. And he asked me to paint it. So a few days later, they went pretty quick because I didn't get into too much detail. I brought the painting to him almost completed, and he said, it's all right, but it looks like he has breasts. So I went and corrected it. Then he accepted it, and he again wrote on a small piece of paper, Narada Muni Bajai Veena Radhika Ramana Namane. And he translated it, that Narada Muni plays his veena and chants Hare Krishna. Radhika is Radharani, and Ramana, Radhika Ramana, means the enjoyer of Radhika. So that means Hare Krishna, Hare Ram.
I said, Srila Prabhupada, can I ask you a question? What is it like to be with Krishna? And Srila Prabhupada replied, well, I thought he said incomprehension, I mean like inconceivable. But later Hansaduta said he thought Prabhupada said that's confidential. But anyway, I thought he said it's conceivable. So we drove to Harvard Divinity School, and Srila Prabhupada gave a brilliant lecture. But, you know, Harvard University, being reputed as the best in the nation, I mean, the students were quite proud of themselves. So at the end of the lecture, when Srila Prabhupada said, any questions, like, so many hands shot up. So one young man began to say, you know, what is the utility of Krishna consciousness? And he started speaking about the Russian Revolution, you know, that the Russian Revolution actually did some good for the people, but what good will Krishna consciousness do? And of course Srila Prabhupada answered, and he said, well, okay, since the Russian Revolution, are the people in Russia happy? And the boy said, no. And Srila Prabhupada said, then what is the use? And even if things get better for some time, again after some time they will get worse. So what is the use? And he explained the benefit of Krishna consciousness. Then another young man asked, you know, you say we should chant Hare Krishna, repeat Hare Krishna, but couldn't we get the same effect just by repeating numbers, just counting numbers? So Srila Prabhupada replied, yes, you can try counting, and after you're tired of counting, you can try chanting. And everyone laughed. Then someone asked, have you seen God? And Srila Prabhupada said, if I tell you falsely that I've seen God, will you believe me? So at first the boy didn't know what he just heard. And Srila Prabhupada repeated, if I tell you falsely that I have seen God, will you believe me? And the boy said, no. And Srila Prabhupada said, then what is the use of the question? So like one after the other, he was completely defeating all the opponents. And so quickly, without any hesitation, that the students were stunned. I mean, the whole room became hushed. And they realized they were in the presence of a superior personality.
One morning, Prabhupada was having his oil massage. Harisori Prabhu was giving him a massage on the roof of Prabhupada's quarters in Mayapur. I took some letters that I replied, went to Srila Prabhupada, and I used to read the letters out to, the replies out to Srila Prabhupada, and then Prabhupada used to sign them. Prabhupada signed the letters, and then he continued to take his massage. And although Prabhupada signed the letters and I should have left, but I just sat there and watching Srila Prabhupada having his massage. And then Prabhupada just started to speak on his own. I mean, addressing me. He told, many lifetimes you tried to enjoy, but you can see that you are still not satisfied. So just offer this life to Krishna. And don't get involved with any woman. And then he explained the futility of man-woman relationship. He explained how sex desire is actually the chain that binds us in the material nature. And that's why the material nature is called Moithunagara, or a prison house of sex desire. And in this note, Srila Prabhupada spoke for about, I don't know for how long time, like half an hour, 45 minutes. And when I left, I felt that Prabhupada actually wanted me to become a sannyasi. I mean, that's just a feeling.
Then a year later, in '68, when I was in Boston, because Prabhupada said whatever painting he gave me to do, he wanted it for whatever temple there was. First there was only New York, then San Francisco, then Montreal, then Boston, and then Seattle, and Los Angeles. So each time the painting had to be in greater numbers. So I was doing my second Narada Muni painting, and I wanted this for San Francisco, because Prabhupada was in Los Angeles and soon would be coming there, so I thought it would be nice to welcome him. But I wanted this painting to be better than my first. I thought the first was crude and amateurish. So I had remembered that when I was Karmi, before I joined Prabhupada, I lived in New York, and I saw that in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, there was one exhibition of the Mona Lisa. And people would come from all over the world and line the streets. The streets were lined for 3 blocks. And finally you get a 1-minute viewing, and then you have to move on. So I thought, I'll make Krishna pictures on the same level as Leonardo da Vinci's pictures or Michelangelo's pictures. And in this way, Krishna conscious pictures will be famous all over the world. So I went to the library and got some references of some Michelangelo pictures of Jesus Christ and things, and some more realistic scenery, forests, than the original print that he'd given me in New York. But of course I couldn't find any Indian background, so I found a American redwood forest. And so I went back to the temple and began work, and after about a week or two the painting was finished with a muscle-bound, gaunt-cheeked Narada Muni wearing a Christ-like dhoti and in a redwood forest. And I mailed the painting. I used to go to the lumber yard and get the crates and nail the crates and cut the frames and everything. So I mailed it to, sent it on one of those Greyhound trips. And then the devotees wrote me back letters that this has increased our ecstasy in the kirtan, and we jumped practically to the ceiling seeing this painting. It was so wonderful. And then about a week later, Prabhupada went to San Francisco, and he didn't have the same response. He asked Govinda Dasi, she somehow or other, wherever he was, she ended up his personal servant, to write me that he was looking at one print of, you know that picture of Suradas and 5-year-old Krishna, and he's blind and he's playing on his veena, and Krishna is just listening. So Prabhupada said that this is the Vedic milk drinker's conception of beauty. Full, smooth lips, full, smooth cheeks, and sweet red lips. This is the milk drinker's conception of beauty. And what you have done is the meat eater's conception of beauty. Gaunt cheeks and muscles. So she said that the standard of the beauty was this Brijbasi print. Now previous to that, Prabhupada said that the Brijbasi company did nice cartoons. And I had thought that, yes, I'm the realistic painter and these are just cartoons. But now that I could see that he liked the cartoons better than mine. And Prabhupada wrote his own letter that we are not meant for satisfying the senses of the public, they are fools. We are meant for satisfying the senses of Krishna and the previous acharyas. And we don't mind if people don't buy our paintings. We'll just distribute them freely to the centers. And then he said, we're not interested in following the so-called great artists. The other day, I went to meaning Prabhupada, went to a Universalist Unitarian church, and on their walls they had these pictures, these paintings of still lifes of like ropes and bamboo rods and fishermen's nets. But this did not inspire my Krishna consciousness. So I find that Govinda Dasi, she's a great artist because she's painting Krishna. So you will do well not to follow these so-called great artists. Then I was completely devastated, depressed, discouraged, miserable, suicidal, and I wrote back a 3-line letter apologizing. Then about a week later, which means Prabhupada answered instantly. In fact, that's another thing of his qualities, is that although he was the busiest person in the world, he answered letters quicker than anyone else in the world. So a week later I got a letter from him saying, this is the first time that I've received a letter from you that's only 3 lines. Please don't be depressed. The thing is, there's this story. And then he told the story of one Brahmin who was away from home. And generally Brahmins, according to the religious tradition, they're only allowed to eat at the house of a Hindu. If they would eat at the house of a Muslim or any other, they would be ostracized from the Brahminical community. So he was away from home and very hungry. So he went to this Mohammedan's house, and the Mohammedan fed him. But then when he said, do you have any more? The Mohammedan said, I'm sorry, that's all I have. So he left the house and lamented, I've lost my caste, and still I'm hungry. So that was another analogy. So Prabhupada said, so it takes a very long time to become a great artist. And in the meantime, you lose your Krishna consciousness. So take whatever talent you have now and immediately engage it in Krishna's service. Then, and he said, and we'll talk further when I come to New York. And he told me exactly when he was coming. So maybe a couple of weeks later, he arrived in New York, and again all the Boston devotees went down there. And Prabhupada asked to see me after his darshan. And I didn't know what he was going to say. He just asked me to sit there. And so, not waiting for him to say whatever he had to say, I just blurted out, I'm so sorry I did that painting of Narada Muni. If there's some way I can make it up, I'll do it over or whatever. So Prabhupada said, no, it was very nice. So he gave me, 10 seconds of relief, and then he started again. from where his letter left off. And he said, not to copy from the great, so-called great artists. Then he said, in fact, people don't even like a painting for how technically great it is, but who did it? Like Picasso. Picasso's art really isn't that good, but he has a name, so everybody buys his paintings for so much money. They say, oh, so-and-so painted that? Oh, very good. So I said, I was feeling a little better by now in his association. And so I said, oh, well, we say that too. We say, oh, Swamiji said that? Oh, very good. So Prabhupada was so humble, he said, of course, that is love. That is a different thing. Just like a mother has a blind child, and out of love, she calls the child Padma Lochan, or lotus-eyed. And then he was talking so casually that I didn't realize how we were sitting. But when I finally looked, we were sitting, he had this trunk desk, and his trunk desk was covered by some kind of blanket. And that's where he did a lot of his work. And so we were both sitting like that on his trunk desk. And so he said, since we were talking about eyes, he said, I like your eyes, cat's eyes. Everyone likes cat's eyes, don't you? So I was completely flustered, and I said, I like your eyes, lotus-eyed. So Prabhupada was sitting on his mat, and then he threw himself over halfway onto the floor, and he said, oh, I'm an old fool. And I was so bewildered by his overwhelming humility that I just offered my obeisances and left. There were many times that I kicked myself for leaving his association. That was one of them. So that was another instruction through the hard knocks process.
And of course, Srila Prabhupada's letter was also very wonderful. He said that, I'm glad to know that you have experienced at least some of the bliss of Krishna consciousness. And he said that Giriraj is the name of Govardhan Hill, where Krishna tends his cows. And sometimes devotees take stone from Govardhan Hill and worship it as Krishna. And he said, I marked it in your presence when I met you, and I prayed to Krishna that this soul become aware of the importance of Krishna consciousness. So, of course, at the time I'd only joined 2.5 months. And our family's name was Teton. And as far as we knew, we were the only Tetons in the whole world, and we were very proud of it. And we identified with the Grand Teton Mountains, and we were very proud of it. So when Prabhupada gave me the name of a mountain, I was just astonished. I thought, he knows everything. He even knew I was proud of my mountain name. And he gave me another mountain name, just so I wouldn't feel I lost anything. So that was my initiation.
So one morning, Srila Prabhupada wanted some orange juice. So there was no orange in Prabhupada's kitchen. So I went to the deity kitchen, devotee kitchen. There was no orange. So I had to go to the fruit shop, to buy some oranges. And those days, you remember, there was nothing in front of our temple. So to get the oranges, I had to go quite a distance, near the bus station. And so I came back with the oranges, and I started to make the orange juice, and the bell rang. Srila Prabhupada used to call us by ringing the bell. And so I ran to Srila Prabhupada's room. So Prabhupada asked me what happened to the orange juice. So I said, well, Srila Prabhupada, I'm just getting it, And then I went back and started to make the orange juice. And then, it took me some time to make it. So the bell rang again. But this time, the bell just kept on ringing continuously, Prabhupada just kept pressing the bell, And just by the sound of the bell, I could understand, how angry Srila Prabhupada must be. So I somehow, finished making the orange juice, put it in Prabhupada's silver cup, and took it on a silver plate and rushed into Prabhupada's room. But as I opened the door, I heard something that sounded like a thunderbolt. And Prabhupada was just telling me, like, take it away, I don't want it. I don't want it, I'd get out of here. But, I could not get out, Like, so with the bowl in with the plate, with the glass of orange juice in my hands, I just kept on moving towards Srila Prabhupada. And I came to Srila Prabhupada and I held it in front of him. For some time, Srila Prabhupada didn't pick up the glass. And finally Prabhupada picked it up and he started to drink it. When he started to drink it, I realized that I forgot to bring the bowl of water that Prabhupada would need to wash his mouth after drinking the juice. So I ran to the kitchen, got the bowl of water, and then when Prabhupada was washing his mouth, then I remembered that I forgot to bring the napkin for Prabhupada to wipe his face. So this time I didn't run to the kitchen, I just went to Prabhupada's wardrobe and pulled out a towel and gave it to Srila Prabhupada. So then Prabhupada started to tell me, you're trying to serve me so nicely, but I always chastise you. You see, when one becomes old, one becomes short-tempered, so please don't mind. When Srila Prabhupada was chastising me, I didn't feel bad. But when Prabhupada started to speak like that, my heart just broke. And I tried to tell Prabhupada, please don't speak like that, Prabhupada. But my voice was choked. And then finally but Prabhupada continuously speaking, like in that note, like how when one becomes old, one becomes short-tempered. And then I managed to speak up and I told Prabhupada, please don't speak like that. I make mistakes, and if you don't correct me, then what will happen to me? That's one of the instances I remember when Srila Prabhupada chastised me very heavily.
Regarding the getting inspiration from the so-called old masters, I was concerned about that in 1968 because I knew I wasn't very talented and I was wondering if I should study. So I wrote to Prabhupada and he wrote back that there's a story that the man who lives next to you in the house next to you speaks a different language. He's from another country. And his house one day is on fire. Now, you want to tell him to do something. If you take the time to learn his language, in the meantime, everything is finished. So somehow or other, express it. Like he told one story that in India, a lot of Britishers were the owners of the shops, and the Indian people worked for them. So one Britisher was out, and it was a cloth shop, and some monkeys came and messed everything up. So when the owner came back, the Indian worker couldn't speak English, so he just jumped up and down and said, "Monkey sir, monkey sir, monkey sir." So Prabhupada wanted to somehow, whatever we knew of the artistic language, express it, because now it was an emergency. Prabhupada did not care to wait that we became talented. It was amazing to me because I knew that as Krishna's associate, even though we were young devotees, we knew the powers of the pure devotee. we had enough books and enough lectures to know the mystic powers and spiritual powers of a pure devotee. So I knew that he could have asked a demigod or gotten some big powerful person on the earth to paint for him, and yet he took us who really had no talent, or extremely little. And on top of that, he wasn't interested in waiting until we got talented by many, many paintings before we started to work for his books. Even the Krishna book was 1960, early 69, and he took us from, that was our first attempt at our own compositions, and they were extremely crude, and still he wanted it done at that time. And you know that Prabhupada came when Krishna chose that particular time for him to come, in those very historical, sociological 60s times. The whole thing was planned by Krishna. So there was some reason, although I couldn't understand it, that Prabhupada didn't want to wait for us to become expert.
In the course of the morning walks in Los Angeles, I asked some other questions. I remember at Cheviot Hills I asked that we preach that Krishna is the origin of everything. But sometimes people ask the question, what is the origin of Krishna? Srila Prabhupada replied that you tell them that as far as our information goes, Krishna is the origin. But if you have something or someone who's the origin of Krishna, we will worship that thing or that person. But until you find someone who's the origin of Krishna, then you worship Krishna as the origin of all.
And then he told one story. He said, so if you see any spark in anyone, you should fan that spark of their Krishna consciousness. And he told the story of one thief in Vrindavan. And he just happened to pass by one village when there was a Bhagavad recital. And they were doing at that time the 10th canto, how Mother Yasoda would decorate Krishna in valuable ornaments and send him off to play in the forest with his friends and cows. So the thief caught this, and he thought, jewels. I shall go and get those jewels. So he went in the forests of Vrindavan and he just began looking for Krishna. He had faith that Krishna was real. So because he had something good in him, Krishna appeared to him. And the thief said, oh, you're such a nice boy. Why don't you give me your jewels? So Krishna said, no, Mother Yasoda wouldn't like it. And the thief said, oh, yes, it's all right. You can just give me them. And they argued back and forth. And just by that argument, the thief became a pure devotee by Krishna's association. And he fell down and offered his obeisances and became a fully surrendered soul. So Prabhupada said, so similarly, if there's anything in anyone, you should bring that out. So there was an interrelationship between the paintings and Prabhupada speaking.
One day when Srila Prabhupada was taking his massage in Surat, I asked the question that how can we deal with envy? Because I knew that I had envy, and I knew that envy was bad. And in the days before I actually asked the question, I had been considering the subject. And I had come to the conclusion that there's no use being envious because Krishna is unlimited, and Krishna's service is unlimited, and Krishna's mercy is unlimited. So if someone else has some special service to Krishna or is getting some special mercy from Krishna, it doesn't really prejudice my chances because there's unlimited service and unlimited mercy. But being envious was hurting my Krishna consciousness. So when I asked Srila Prabhupada about envy, what to do with envy, Srila Prabhupada again replied by asking me, can you think of any reasons why you shouldn't be envious? And I'd already thought of so many reasons why I shouldn't be. So I simply said yes. Then Srila Prabhupada said, so to be envious of someone means that you don't like someone. So that not liking should be directed against the demons who are causing so much trouble to the devotees and so much havoc in the world. That not liking should not be directed towards the devotees.
You see, Prabhupada just opened the Gurukul in Vrindavan and opened a new building actually. The new building was constructed. The Vrindavan Gurukul was going on. The new building was inaugurated. And Srila Prabhupada was very happy with the new building, and he used to tell people that about the Gurukul building when the people came for his darshan. So one very important businessman came to see Srila Prabhupada from Delhi. He is Jayadayal Dalmia, one of the biggest industrialists in India. So he came with his 2 daughters-in-law and their children. And he was a very old man at that time, and very nice and pious man actually. So Srila Prabhupada was telling him about the Gurukul education system, and then he asked him to send his grandchildren to the Gurukul. And he explained to him that the modern education system is simply meant for creating Sudras, how to get a good job. That's the purpose of education. But your children, your grandchildren, do not need to get a job, but they should actually become the leader of the society. And that's why he should actually send his grandchildren to the Gurukul. And Srila Prabhupada also mentioned that, see, the Gandhis, Indira Gandhi's sons, Nehru's grandchildren, coming from such a aristocratic family, such a noble family, but look at them, they have become rascals and rogues. And he said that, do you want your grandchildren to become like that? No. Train them up to become the leaders of the society, a real leader of the society. And in this way Srila Prabhupada actually explained. Now later on I got to know his son, the father of one of the grandchild, and he told me that at that time his father was so convinced that he was planning to send his son to the Gurukul. And I know the son, his name is Abhishek Dalmia. Although he didn't go to Gurukul, but he has, although he didn't go to the Gurukul, but he keeps a sikha, I mean, the family is very, very pious, and it's unfortunate that he didn't send his son to the Gurukul, but I mean, you can see the potency of Srila Prabhupada's preaching. He is one of the richest men in India, and he was considering to send his grandson to the Gurukul.
Today I was writing about 1968, and at that time some new girls had joined in New York, and very young, 15, 16 years old, and they had some artistic propensity. And Prabhupada was encouraging me to go and visit them in New York and help them both with art and general Krishna consciousness. Of course, I don't know how much help I could have been, because I was still wearing dungarees and turtleneck shirts. And I was painting in that way, and whenever I had to change colors or clean my brushes, I would just go like that on my dungarees. So I don't know what kind of example I was, but still Prabhupada was again, he took us from scratch and didn't wait till we became expert in anything. So he was encouraging me to go to New York, and he would call them my assistants. You know, he would be so encouraging. And then he started talking about a brahmacharini ashram. He was in San Francisco, and he said, I'd like to establish now a brahmacharini ashram. You know, where a female equivalent of the brahmachari ashram, where the ladies could get training. And he said, they're asking you to come here for a couple of months, but how will they do without you on the East Coast? You're already starting this program and helping so many girls there. Maybe all the girls from San Francisco should come and join you there in New York. And he was just being so encouraging that even though I didn't know anything really about Krishna consciousness, I thought, yes, I'll do it. I'll train up all the brahmacharinis. So that was actually the beginning of the brahmacharini ashram.
So I went into Srila Prabhupada's room in Calcutta, and I said, that before I came to Krishna consciousness, I used to make movies. So do you think I should make movies for Krishna? And Srila Prabhupada replied, there are others who can do that. Our main medium is books. Then I said that I also like to cultivate big people. He said, oh, that is very important. Yes, you should cultivate big people and convince them of the importance of Krishna consciousness. Then I said, Srila Prabhupada, right now you're here, and everything is going nicely. But what if in the future, when you're not here, ISKCON falls from the standard? What should I do? Srila Prabhupada replied, you are also one of the important members of the society. So you work for the correction, but don't leave.
This was, just a few days before Prabhupada left the planet. Two very prominent Indian gentlemen came to see Srila Prabhupada. One was the governor of Madras, Sriman Narayan, and his brother-in-law, Ramakrishna Bajaj, a very big industrialist. So two of them came to Prabhupada's room, and some of us were there in Prabhupada's room. And at one point they just told that they wanted to discuss something in private with Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada asked us to leave the room. So, we left the room, although we didn't want to. But while leaving the room, I pressed the button, recording button of the tape recorder. And they asked Prabhupada who would actually have the legacy after Prabhupada left the planet. And Prabhupada mentioned to them that he is giving the legacy to all his disciples, and whoever follows will have the legacy. That was actually printed in the Back to Godhead that came after Prabhupada's disappearance, Prabhupada's final instructions, and this one was there. And then they figured out that the tape recorder was on, and they asked Prabhupada if they could switch off the tape recorder. So that was also there, in the tape recorder. I mean, it was taped. And I don't think after that they had any serious discussions. Actually, what they wanted to know, who would become Prabhupada's successor. But Prabhupada made it very clear that he is giving the legacy to all his disciples, all his followers. So whoever follows has the legacy. And he didn't want to appoint any successor as such.
I was hearing through the grapevine rumors that he was leaving to go to San Francisco to help open the temple there. And it was the first time that he was going to be leaving us. Of course, we were only with him for a few months, but still it was like an eternity, and he was already our everything. So I said, Swamiji, I heard you were going to be leaving in a few days. When are you leaving? So he said, do you think I would ever leave you? Don't think like that. I'm always with you, and you are always with me. So of course he did leave, but later, in the next year and the year after, when I would get depressed and not feel his separation or presence, but just feel his absence, those words came back in my mind.
When we first arrived in India, we thought we should do Harinam in the streets every day, like in America. And we were very shocked when Srila Prabhupada said that in India, if we chant in the streets, people will think we're beggars, because so many people in India chant in the streets just to get some paisa. So we didn't really know what to do. Of course, Srila Prabhupada was having so many preaching programs, and we were accompanying him. But then he unveiled the Life Membership Program. And according to the program, the member would contribute 1,111 rupees then. And he would get a lifetime subscription to Back to Godhead, all of Srila Prabhupada's books, past, present, and future, and free guest facilities in all ISKCON centers. And Srila Prabhupada commented that he had devised the membership program as a means to distribute his books. Tamal Krishna Goswami raised the point that that if we give him all the magazines and all the books and give him free stay and prasad in all the temples, we may end up spending much more than 1,111 rupees in the member's life. But Srila Prabhupada replied that you'll always be going back to the life members, and they'll always be giving more and more. And, he may only give 1,111 rupees to become a life member, but in the course of his life, he may give 10,000 rupees. So I understood that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to actively cultivate the life members and encourage them in Krishna consciousness. And after the first Bombay Pandal, Srila Prabhupada called for the first meeting of life members. And he spoke to them about the 6 exchanges of love. And he said that the membership program is actually meant to facilitate the 6 exchanges, that we give you books, we give you Krishna consciousness, you give us contributions, we invite you for prasad, you invite us for prasad, and you reveal your mind and ask questions, and we reveal our mind and answer. So it was very sweet the way Srila Prabhupada explained the whole thing, very transcendental. And that was really his idea, that we should develop deep friendships with them, and they should really become convinced about Krishna consciousness, support the movement, and themselves gradually become Krishna conscious.
When Prabhupada came to Boston, everyone was working very hard to get ready for him, painting walls and woodworks. And everyone was so busy that I was the only one that went to see him at the airport. I took a taxi, and I made the garland in the taxi. Then he and Govinda Dasi and Gursundar came off the plane, and I very clumsily ran up to him, and he graciously accepted the garland. And then we took a taxi back to the temple, and as we were walking up the steps, not to the temple, to his house on Chester Street, as we were walking up to the house, Govinda Dasi whispered to me that one of the paintings I did in my so-called great example to the Brahmacharinis, was a painting of Radha and Krishna. And at that time I was also using the old master's references. So the only nice picture I found of a girl that looked anything like Radharani could have with a long skirt, she was Dutch, and she was facing the wrong way, not towards Krishna. But I wanted to have a realistic girl, and she was pretty. So I copied her just as she was. I didn't even think that I could have turned her around. With, you take a mirror and then you can flop a picture. I didn't think of that. So here's Krishna playing his flute, and here's Radharani facing away from Krishna holding the garland. So Govinda Dasi whispered to me as we were coming up the steps that the Swamiji just said in New York that in your painting it looks like Radharani has another boyfriend. So after we came in the house and Prabhupada sat on this big sofa and we all sat at his feet, I said to him, Swamiji, I heard that you didn't like that painting. It looks like Radharani has another boyfriend, so I'll do it over. So he said, no, Radharani is offering Jadurani a garland for painting so many nice pictures of Krishna. So I just thought, personally, me, she's personally offering a garland to me.
You see, it was in Vrindavan, one morning, Srila Prabhupada asked me to see if there is spinach, the two varieties of spinach, the green variety and the red variety. He asked me to see if we have these two varieties of spinach, if there was pumpkin, radish, eggplant, and bitter melon. So I went to the kitchen, and in Prabhupada's kitchen there was no spinach. So I went to the deity kitchen and devotee kitchen, and I was told that that was the month of spinach fast. So I went and told Prabhupada that, Prabhupada, this is Chaturmas and this is the month of spinach fast. So Prabhupada asked me, is everyone observing Chaturmas? So I got the message. So I myself went to the market to buy everything. And I went to the market and I thought I got everything. Then I came back and I told Prabhupada, I got everything. So Prabhupada asked me, what you got? So I said, Prabhupada, I got these two varieties of spinach, I got eggplant, I got pumpkin, I got radish. And then I remembered that I forgot to get bitter melon. But it was so stupid of me, like I told Prabhupada, I lied to Prabhupada, and I said the bitter melon. So I thought, just arrange to get the bitter melon, and so Prabhupada said, bring them. Yeah. So I ran out, so Prabhupada asked me to bring it. So I ran out, and there was an employee in the kitchen, in the guest house. His name was Kishan. So I gave some money to Kishan, and I said, Kishan, take the cycle, go to the market, and get some bitter melon. And so I was, I thought it'll take 10-15 minutes, And in the meantime, I went to the kitchen, I started to prepare other preps. And I was kind of, running back to the gate and kitchen and back, And then finally Kishan came back. And he said that there is no bitter melon in the market. And so I already went to the kitchen, the devotee kitchen. There was no bitter melon. And at that time, I felt as if, the whole world is crumbled down on me, And I was literally praying to Krishna, like, please save me from, now I have to go and tell Prabhupada that I lied to him, that I forgot to bring bitter melon. And, like I was kind of dazed and walking back. I was kind of preparing myself. Now I have to go and tell Prabhupada. I didn't tell him at that time because I thought that Prabhupada would get annoyed with me and start chastising. And now, who knows, what kind of chastisement I'll get, And so usually what I used to do is take the passage next to the temple, the Parikrama Marg, and walk up to the up to Prabhupada's kitchen. But I don't know, I was so dazed. I walked up to the Gurukul building, and then I started to, go that way through the Gurukul building. And there, I saw on the balcony, on that passage, to Gurukul, there is one green bitter melon. I just pounced on that and started to thank Krishna in every possible way and ran, picked up the vegetables and went to Prabhupada's room. And Prabhupada was already taking his massage. So before taking his bath, he used to take his massage. So I went to his room and I told Prabhupada I brought the vegetables. So Prabhupada told me how to cut the vegetables. And then finally I said, Prabhupada, and the bitter melon? And so Prabhupada looked at me and said, bitter melon. And just the way Srila Prabhupada said bitter melon, I was completely convinced beyond any doubt that Prabhupada knew what actually happened.
Perhaps the main quality of Srila Prabhupada that strikes me is his compassion. And of course his compassion was manifest in the intense desire to make everyone Krishna conscious. And his compassion was manifest in everything he did. I remember one incident where Srila Prabhupada was giving a public program outdoors in indoor. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people in the street. It was arranged in the street. And the kirtan had just finished and the lecture was just about to begin. And I just had some silly question in my mind and I just wanted to ask Srila Prabhupada. So without thinking of anything, I just went right up to Srila Prabhupada in front of everyone, right in the middle of the program. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, you know the verse such and such, where does it come from? And Srila Prabhupada looked at me and he said, Hari Bhakti Sudodaya, perhaps. And then I went back and sat down and he continued with the program. So years later, I would reflect on the incident because sometimes devotees would interrupt me when I was in the middle of some activity or some thought, and I'd get very disturbed. And then I'd think of Srila Prabhupada, right in the middle of a big public program. For no reason at all, I just go up to him and ask this silly little question. And he didn't get upset at all. He very patiently and considerately answered it. So whenever I feel someone is interrupting me or intruding, I think of Srila Prabhupada and how kind he was.
Madhusudana asked Prabhupada after his lecture, if prasadam is stale, is it still all right to eat it if it gets old? And Prabhupada said, simply, if you have got the faith. Meaning if you don't, you'll get sick, and if you do, then of course you can take.
Then he said, do you ever feel like getting married? And actually I didn't. So I said no. I said the only thing is that sometimes I see all the GBCs are married, so I think maybe I should marry. And he said, you will never be GBC. Then he said that the demands of the body, like sex or any other demand, are like itching. And if you try to scratch the itch will get worse. He said the best thing is to tolerate, and gradually the itching will subside. He said whatever it may be, hunger also, it will subside. So the best thing is to tolerate. So you remain brahmachari for some time, and then I will give you sannyas. So then I understood what Prabhupada wanted, and I decided without any doubt that I'll remain brahmachari.
Then I didn't know that I wasn't getting initiated, so I was there. In fact, anybody was there. But Govinda Dasi, who was Prabhupada's one of his personal servants, she wasn't there because she knew she wasn't going to get initiated, and she felt bad. So she came in late in the second part of the ceremony during the fire sacrifice. And when she came in, the fire sacrifice was sort of near the door, the front door. So when she came in, Prabhupada looked up and said, "Oh, I was just thinking, where is the girl? And Krishna has sent." Then the landlady not came in, but stormed in, because she was a drunkard. She was the wife of the landlord. And she stormed in the room and she said, "God damn this house." So Prabhupada looked up very innocent, and then she slammed the door closed and left. You know, she saw all the smoke and the fire. So Prabhupada very innocently said, "What did she say? This is the house of God?" Then the next morning, we all joined Prabhupada for his morning walk, and he said to the devotees who had received their initiation, "Now don't be a Brahmin in name only." So Govinda Dasi and I, and there was one other girl in the temple, Annapurna, who had joined us from London, we all naturally felt miserable and horrible. I thought we're not supposed to be on the bodily platform around here. So, but I didn't say anything. In fact, I was miserable because I was foolish enough to forget that I could have just asked Prabhupada about it after the initiations, but I didn't even think of that. I just chose to feel bad. But the very next night, Prabhupada had Brahminical initiation just for the three girls, Govinda Dasi, Annapurna, and I. And his whole lecture was most of his lecture was about how girls should be married. Then I realized that he had a different message, and so he made it a different ceremony. Because in subsequent Brahminical initiations, girls and boys were together. So he was saying how all women should be married. When I was a householder, he's saying, my friend had one daughter who he wanted to marry, and the girl said, "I am not going to be a slave of any man." And so Prabhupada said to her, "That is not slavery, that is grand protection." And then he was saying how there was no necessity of the Brahmin's thread for the girl, because she has to follow her husband, and if the husband is a Brahmana, then she automatically becomes a Brahmana by following his vows. And if he's not a Brahmana, what is the use of her becoming a Brahmana? Then he pointed to one painting that I did, which was on the wall to his left, of Sita, Ram, Hanuman, and Lakshman. And it was interesting because when I first did that painting, I came in late one day for class, and Prabhupada interrupted everything, and he called out to me, totally on the other side of the temple room. He said, "Did you do that painting?" And I said, "Yes," and it was simply a copy of a Brijbasi print. The only difference between mine and the print was that I made him green instead of blue like they had him, because I know Prabhupada said he was green. So I said, "Yes, that's my painting." So he made his big announcement, "You are already in Vaikuntha." So anyway, so again he motioned to that picture, and he said, just like Ram has a sacred thread, but Sita doesn't. But still, we say Sita Ram. She is the energy. She's first, Sita Ram. And we know so much about Krishna, but we hardly know anything about Radharani. But still we say Radha Krishna. So he was trying to tell us that you're not going to get a thread, but it doesn't matter. And then he said, don't become implicated, just remain pure, get yourselves married. That was the main thrust of the lecture.
After some months in Boston, and we hardly made any new devotees, one young man came named Peter. And Peter was very eccentric. He used to sit in the hallway at the entrance to the building, and he would lean his back against the wall. A lot of the times he would have his legs out straight. He would read. Sometimes he would just lie down in the hallway and sleep. So we were getting quite upset, because the first thing that any new person would see was Peter, slouched out in the hallway and sometimes completely asleep. So Satsvarupa Maharaj wrote Srila Prabhupada what to do. And Srila Prabhupada wrote back, what's the matter? Can't you tolerate? So that was the answer. And we tolerated. But we felt uneasy, but we tolerated. After some days, Peter, and he came to be known as Crazy Peter. After some days, Crazy Peter left Boston and went to New Vrindavan. And on my way from Boston to India through New York, I just happened to ask about Crazy Peter, because I just wanted to know. We were a very small family then. So the devotee said he'd gone to New Vrindavan and he was doing very well, and that he was going to be initiated. I was quite amazed. Anyway, I lost track of Crazy Peter until about 20 years later, when I visited Los Angeles, and I saw Crazy Peter at Mangalarti. So I asked some of the devotees, that was already 20 years, 1990 or so. Prabhupada had already left. I was surprised that he was still with us. So I asked some devotee, who is that? The devotee said, oh, that's Kushakrata Prabhu. I said, Kushakrata? And he was famous, because he was translating scriptures from Sanskrit into English and Bengali into English. And I thought, my God, how merciful Srila Prabhupada is, that by his mercy and compassion, Crazy Peter, who we didn't see any potential in much, had come to the stage where he was translating Vaishnava literature into English. So one quality of Srila Prabhupada was that he just intensely desired that everyone should be engaged in Krishna service and act in Krishna consciousness. And he saw the chance in everyone, and he wanted to give everyone the chance. And he was really ready to extend himself to any extent.
Prabhupada taught me to cook one preparation called bati chachari. It is made with potal and potatoes. And you put a lot of ghee and a lot of chili, a lot of red chili. And so Prabhupada asked me to cook that preparation. But But Prabhupada's stomach was not very good at that time. So while preparing that, I felt that I should not put so much red chili. So I cooked it, with, no, he had stomach problem. I mean, his stomach was not so good. So he didn't want any red chili. And he didn't want any red chili in there. I mean, I didn't put any red chili, thinking that, like his stomach was not good. And when I served, Prabhupada just took a bite and he became very angry. He said that I personally taught you how to cook it and you forgot. And he was very, very heavy, And not only at that time, for next 2 days, whenever I went near him, he just blasted me. That and his point was, he personally taught me how to cook that, and I forgot. And not only he chastised me, whoever went to him, he also told him how useless I was. Then on the third day, when Prabhupada's anger subsided to some extent, and Prabhupada kind of, rather in a mild way this time, he asked me, how could you forget when I personally taught you? And then I told Prabhupada, I didn't actually forget. I deliberately didn't put it because I thought your stomach was not good. And red chili will not be good for your condition. Then Prabhupada told me, then why didn't you tell me all this while? And then he told me that ghee is hot and chili is hot. But when there is a lot of ghee and a lot of chili, they counteract each other's effect.
Another example, in a completely different context, is Mr. Sethi in Bombay. Mr. Sethi was a life member and a great Sankirtan devotee. He was an older man. And he had a construction company. So when we were first building the additional floors on the existing buildings at the back of Hare Krishna land, he did the job. And so when the first ashram was almost ready, he took Srila Prabhupada up to see it. And Srila Prabhupada started to give us instructions about how we should live there. And he said that that every morning we should lift everything off the floor, and the floor should be washed with water. Then he gave some instructions. And then he said to Mr. Sethi that just as you are building these rooms for my disciples here, Krishna is building your rooms for you in Vaikuntha. So, as time went by, we ultimately built the guest house, and on the top floor of the tower facing the sea was Srila Prabhupada's quarters. So when the quarters were ready, he invited Mr. Sethi to see them. And, he told Mr. Sethi, just see what they've done for me. Marble floors, chandeliers, carved wood, such nice furniture, everything. And then he said, Mr. Sethi, I always wanted you to join us, but you always felt that you couldn't accept the austere conditions. So, Mr. Sethi, I want you to stay here. And I will stay somewhere else. Mr. Sethi, but Prabhupada, I can't stay here. Where will you go? He said, oh, I have so many places. I can stay anywhere. You stay here. So again, Srila Prabhupada demonstrated just how intense his desire was that everyone should be engaged in Krishna's service, and to what extent he was ready to sacrifice to engage one soul in Krishna consciousness.
Before we sat down at the couch, he had just walked in, and I know that he wanted me to do a lot of painting, but to prepare for his arrival, because there was only 3 devotees in the temple at that time, Satsrup Maharaj, Pradyumna, and myself. And the other devotees who were there, they came a few days before Prabhupada came, 1 or 2 days to help prepare, and they were there during his visit, but before then it was just us 3. So I complained to Prabhupada. It wasn't really a complaint, I just wanted to let him know that I really wanted to do all the paintings that he wanted me to, but this particular last few weeks, I was getting ready for you. I had to sew the Vyasasana, and I had to make advertisements of your engagements, and I had to go all around town and paste them on all the telephone poles. So it sounded like a complaint. So Prabhupada said, most indignantly and sarcastically, "Don't worry, I won't be around that long." And so I was trying to make him understand that, no, I just didn't understand priorities. So he showed a lot of compassion, and he said, when there's an order from the spiritual master, that comes first, unless there's an emergency. So he was showing that he understood. And then he walked a step closer to me, and stepped very close, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, very also like that, he said, "Compared to the karmis, what suffering do you have? They are struggling and suffering so much. What inconvenience do you have?" That was his also compassion.
Srila Prabhupada never asked us to do anything that he personally wasn't ready to do himself. Whatever austerities he asked us to accept, he accepted more. When we went to the Ardha Kumbha Mela in 1971, we were living in tents, and it was freezing cold. It was freezing cold. But Srila Prabhupada was right there with us in the next tent. You know, maybe a little bit bigger, because he would receive people and preach. But he was right there with us. But it was so cold, I remember in the morning I wouldn't want to get out of the sleeping bag, it was so cold. So the devotees were starting to miss Mangalarti, and Srila Prabhupada was very concerned. So although I think the devotees used to heat water for him, and he would take bath later in the day, but just to set the example for us, one morning he took freezing cold bath, just like us, taking the water from the pump in the bucket and right out in the cold. I mean, when we would breathe, we would see it in the air. And maybe he even got a little sick, but he did it. And when we saw that Prabhupada was coming out and taking cold bath, then how could we stay in our sleeping bags? He was very compassionate and sympathetic, but at the same time, he wanted to elevate us, and he would push us.
But what touched my heart the most, if I can say so, was Prabhupada's concern for everyone. In one hand, Prabhupada was so strict, but at the same time, Prabhupada was so compassionate and so concerned. Like I remember, Prabhupada for 2 months at least, he did not eat anything. Only once in a while he would take some juice, fruit juice, and a little diluted milk. But he would inquire how the devotees were eating, how the devotee prasad was. So one day Prabhupada asked me to go and check out how the devotee prasad was. And I came back and told that the prasad was not so nice. And Prabhupada called the temple president and he chastised him. He asked why the prasadam was not nice. See, he himself couldn't eat anything for 2 months, but he was so concerned about how the devotees were eating.
So one devotee named Dravida, who later became Pancha Dravida Swami, approached Srila Prabhupada on the veranda in Calcutta. And he said that, in the early days, all the devotees could have personal relationships with you, but now ISKCON has become so big. Srila Prabhupada replied, ISKCON may be big, but I'm still small. So then Dravida said, but, then devotees could just come and talk to you. Prabhupada said, are you not talking to me now? So Dravida was leading up to the point that he wanted to leave ISKCON. Still be a devotee, but outside ISKCON. He said, well, Srila Prabhupada, still, would it be all right if I left ISKCON and practiced Krishna consciousness outside? Srila Prabhupada said yes. So Dravida said, so I have your blessings to move outside? Prabhupada said, how can I give you my blessings to do something I don't want you to do?
And then I asked, we learned that dinosaurs once ruled the earth. Is that true? So he said, how could they rule? They have no intelligence. So he'd make the most complicated philosophical understandings very clear and simple. In fact, once a devotee asked him, how is it that you make this complicated philosophy so simple and clear? So he said, because it is simple. God is great, you are not great, therefore you are not God, and you should surrender to God.
See, I was with Srila Prabhupada, and we were living in Srila Prabhupada's quarters on the 6th floor of the tower. And one of my senior god brothers one day was a little annoyed with me, and he started to chastise me very heavily. And those days I used to be quite sensitive, I was feeling really bad that he chastised me. Then I went to Srila Prabhupada on some, I had to do something. So when I went to Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada just on his own, he just started to tell me, you see, the sign of one's advancement, the sign of one's spiritual advancement is not in the big position one has. The real sign of advancement is how humble and how tolerant one has become. And just that instruction, took away all the, the heaviness from the heart. And I just remembered. And that instruction I often remember, that the sign of our advancement is not in our position, but in how humble and how tolerant we have become.
When Srila Prabhupada came to Madras, I was cultivating the Chief Justice in the High Court, and he was really taking interest in Krishna consciousness. And Srila Prabhupada was really encouraging me. So almost every day I would meet the Chief Justice, and then I would tell Srila Prabhupada what he said, what I said, what he said, and so on. So Srila Prabhupada explained that in Madras there's a big conflict between the Brahmins and the non-Brahmins. And he said, I think that the Chief Justice is non-Brahmin. But there's a big conflict. So you tell him that we can make anyone into a Brahmin. He just has to follow our principles. And we can make anyone into a Brahmin and the whole problem will be solved. So finally the Chief Justice came to the point where he wanted to be initiated. And but the only thing was he couldn't give up tea. So I told Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada said, well, for a big man we can make a little exception. Anyway, at the end of Srila Prabhupada's stay, the Chief Justice arranged a big program in a grounds. And he invited all the judges of Madras and all the advocates. And Srila Prabhupada spoke wonderfully. And in the talk he told about the Goswamis, how highly placed they were in the government and in society, and how they left everything to join the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he was appealing to them to join us. After the lecture in the Pandal, or not in the Pandal, but in the grounds, we went to the Chief Justice's house, and he had a silver statue, small silver statue of Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada engaged little Saraswati, Shamsundar Malati's daughter, who was just a few years old, to demonstrate a very important lesson in Krishna consciousness. So he held the little statue in front of Saraswati. And then he hid it behind his back. And she became bewildered. And Srila Prabhupada said, Saraswati, where's Krishna? And she didn't know. She began looking this way, that way, everywhere. She couldn't find Krishna. Again, Prabhupada said, Saraswati, where's Krishna? And she became even more anxious. Where's Krishna? Looking here and there. Then finally, one of the devotees gave the hint, Saraswati, who has Krishna? Then her eyes lit up in recognition. Oh, Prabhupada has Krishna. Then she looked towards Prabhupada, and Prabhupada very slowly and carefully brought the deity of Krishna out from behind his back and held it in front of her. Prabhupada has Krishna. Then Srila Prabhupada said that this is the mood of the Goswamis, that they were always anxious. Where is Krishna? Not that, oh, now I've seen Krishna, now my business is finished. So he continued the theme of the Goswamis. And in the lecture he was quoting how Tyaktva Turna Mashesha Mandala Patishadi Sada Tuchavat, how he kicked off all aristocratic association to join Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and work for the welfare of others. And then he continued on the same theme, going to the last verse and using little Saraswati. So he really knew how to reciprocate with everyone and how to satisfy everyone, simultaneously, like a 3-year-old child and a 50-year-old high court justice.
Once, this was in '69, Arundhati was a new devotee then and shy, so she asked me to ask him if he heard Krishna's flute, if he could hear Krishna's flute. So I asked him, and first he said, why not? But then, in order to get the attention off of himself, he said, he quoted the Sad Goswami Astakam, how the 6 Goswamis are serving Radha and Krishna by the trees that have jewels at their roots. He said a pure devotee can always hear Krishna's flute. So in that way he answered that he did, but he got the attention off of himself.
Once he was actually paraphrasing Prahlad Maharaj, and so many times he would paraphrase Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita, but in such a natural way that you would think he was just speaking as he was thinking. So at the time there were construction workers staying on Hare Krishna land, and in the distance he heard a small child crying. And later I found that he was paraphrasing Prahlad Maharaj, but he said that even in the presence of the mother, who gives all care to the child, still the child is crying. What is the reason? And then he gave the answer that one who is not cared for and protected by the Lord, even in the presence of the mother and the father, he can suffer. So he's saying that whatever we do on our own, we may or may not succeed. We depend on the care and protection of the Lord.
There was one man who had come, perhaps for the first time. He looked like a really strong lumberjack man. And he called out and challenged in a loud voice after the lecture, "How do you know that God eats?" So Prabhupada said very calmly, "God says I eat in the Bhagavad Gita." So I may be a fool number 1, but who should I believe, God or a rascal like you? And then he was, around the same time, he spoke about prasadam in the lectures, and he said, the father gives the boy his supper, and they're sitting at the table eating supper. And the boy says, "Here, Father, you take first, or you taste it." So the father doesn't need the food from the son. In fact, he provided it. But just the fact that the son offered it, he said, "Oh yes, it looks very nice, I'll take it." And just the fact that he offered it increases the loving relationship. So he was teaching us the mentality. Then he said, people criticize that you simply cut up some fruit and you call it prasadam. He said, yes, it is prasadam. Even an atheist can taste the difference between an unoffered chapati and an offered chapati.
When Prabhupada first went to Mayapur with his American disciples, they bought a piece of land in Mayapur, and so Prabhupada actually drove straight to Mayapur, our place. It was just a small hut that they built for Srila Prabhupada, without stopping at Gaudiya Math, Chaitanya Math, and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Samadhi. So some of his godbrothers commented that he didn't even stop at his spiritual master's Samadhi. So when Prabhupada heard about that, when Prabhupada was told that they were speaking like that, then Prabhupada commented, "Do they think that I am ever separated from my spiritual master even for a moment? My spiritual master is always with me." And that is how a disciple should always be conscious of his spiritual master. Like, spiritual master is none other than the super soul. The spiritual master is the super soul, or actually even more than the super soul. The yogis, when they attain perfection, they see the super soul in the heart. A devotee, when he attains perfection, he sees his spiritual master in the heart. So pure devotion means to see his spiritual master in his heart all the time. So more we become Krishna conscious, more we make spiritual advancement, the more we will see Srila Prabhupada in our hearts. And we are seeing, like, actually that's the benefit of being in ISKCON. Like everywhere we see Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada's temples, Prabhupada's deities, Prabhupada's books, Prabhupada's devotees, everything is Srila Prabhupada. And that's what is actually not only protecting us from the onslaughts of Maya, but automatically pushing us towards our ultimate destination, Krishna's lotus feet.
With a businessman, he would give a business example. Like with Mr. Mota, who was a businessman, he said that according to Chanakya Pandit, at the time of death, even if we're willing to spend crores of rupees, we cannot get one moment more to live. So he was saying that that means that every moment is worth crores of rupees. And the time that is spent in Krishna consciousness is profit. And the time that is not spent in Krishna consciousness is loss. So he said, you make your balance sheet and you see the profit and the loss, and you use all your time in Krishna consciousness.
So after the class, one boy stood up and asked, well, isn't it all like a dream? And when you wake up from the dream, you see that there's really nothing there from the dream. So don't we lose our individuality and just kind of merge? That was the big philosophy of the time, merging. So Prabhupada said, well, you're not the person in the dream, but it doesn't mean you're not a person. You're somebody who had the dream. And although you were thinking that you were somebody else in the dream, when you wake up, you realize who you are. So that's how Krishna consciousness is.
So every morning, Dr. Patel would come to Juhu and take Srila Prabhupada in his car to Juhu Beach in the bad weather. And in the good weather, he would just walk with Srila Prabhupada to Juhu Beach. But Dr. Patel was sort of a Mayavadi. At least sometimes Srila Prabhupada would call him a Mayavadi, although he would deny it and say that he was a Vaishnava. So one morning, Srila Prabhupada criticized some famous Mayavadi sannyasi of India. And Dr. Patel really got upset. He really felt offended, and ultimately he left. So later, the devotees were very upset with Dr. Patel, because he was always arguing with Srila Prabhupada. And when Srila Prabhupada, to his mind, insulted one of his gurus, Dr. Patel really argued with Srila Prabhupada. He actually chastised Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada argued back. I'm not saying, Krishna is saying. But the devotees were very upset. And so later, Tamal Krishna Goswami asked Srila Prabhupada that, why do you spend so much time with him? And Srila Prabhupada said, we have to engage everyone. But, it was very hard to understand Dr. Patel. Was he a Mayavadi? Was he a Vaishnava? And Srila Prabhupada told a story that once there was a man who spoke many languages, and nobody could figure out what his original language was. And everyone in the village wanted to know. They wanted to know who they were dealing with. What is his mother tongue? Where does he come from? But whatever language you would speak to him, he would respond perfectly and immediately in the same language. So, how to find out? Then one man said, I will find out. So once, when the other person wasn't looking, he came from behind and gave him a slap. And immediately he started cursing in his original language. So, Srila Prabhupada said that Dr. Patel was like him, that whatever language you spoke to Dr. Patel, he would respond in the same language. But when we hit on the sensitive point, then his real language, then he spoke in his real language.
Once I expressed my desire to learn Sanskrit to Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada asked me, why? What's the use? Yeah, that's what he said. What's the use? So I started to tell Prabhupada, like giving him different reasons, and Prabhupada started to, smash all those reasons. And then finally he made the point that our business is not to become a Sanskrit scholar. There are so many Sanskrit scholars, but what are they doing? Our main business is to preach Krishna consciousness all over the world. And with whatever ability, with whatever qualifications we have, we should just try to preach Krishna consciousness.
The first time I met Mr. Mota in his office, he started to preach impersonal philosophy and say that in Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna says me, he doesn't mean Krishna, the person. So usually when Prabhupada was in Bombay, I'd come to him in the evening and report about the day's activities. So I told him about the meeting with Mr. Mota. And Srila Prabhupada gave the reply that if Krishna is not Krishna, he was saying Krishna is not Krishna, Krishna means something else. So Prabhupada said, if Krishna is not Krishna, then who is he? Mota? And then Mr. Mota had said that actually, the all-pervading Krishna is greater than the person Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada said that you should ask Mr. Mota that what is more valuable to you? 100 million rupees spread out 1 rupee in everyone else's pocket, or 1 million rupees in your pocket. So he was saying, even if the all-pervading Krishna is greater, but we'll get more benefit from the person Krishna. So again, he gave the perfect analogy according to the mentality of the person.
Govinda Dasi and Gaurasundar were Prabhupada's personal servants as husband and wife. And we were all surrounding Prabhupada in Chester Street getting the nectar, except for one person, Gaurasundar, because he felt that he was always with Prabhupada, and better if he studied his Bengali so he could help Prabhupada later with his Chaitanya Charitamrita translations. So Prabhupada stopped his nectar and said, "Where's Gaurasundar?" Nobody knew, but somebody went out and brought him back. And even though Gaurasundar was with Prabhupada so often, Prabhupada chastised him and said, "Don't you ever think you're too advanced to hear." There was one time in 1974, Radha Ballabha at that time was the manager of the press in New York. And the press was doing a reprint of the Krishna book. And we felt that the original Krishna book paintings were very crude. And so we wanted to put in new paintings which told similar stories. So we spent hours picking out better versions of the old Krishna book paintings and sent them to Ramaswara in Los Angeles. And he showed the paintings, the new offerings to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada rejected 99% of them. He said, these old Krishna book paintings are our ISKCON trademarks, and unless you have sanction from me, you can't replace any of them. And he would tell why. Here, this is such a beautiful picture, and this one just simply shows a black face of Putana. How can you say this is better? And we did one of Vasudev, in the original Krishna book, Vasudev crossing the river Jamuna, carrying baby Krishna, without Ananta, and we wanted to replace it with another painting that wasn't the same pastime, but another pastime, but better, more expertly done. And Prabhupada said, how can you take out this painting? It's so important. And so Ramaswara said to him, but it didn't have Ananta over him. He said, then put in Ananta, but don't take out the painting. So he was very, very strict on the paintings and their importance and how they have to be exactly right. So he instilled in us time and again the importance of the paintings.
So on the first night of the Pandal, there were many Naxalites in the audience ready to disturb. And the Pandal was arranged that on the two sides there were chairs for VIPs, and then in the middle and at the rear it was just carpet for people to sit on the floor. So the Naxalites began making agitation. Why do some people have chairs and not others? And they were folding wooden chairs, and they started to smash the chairs together to make a disturbance. So Prabhupada was trying to speak, and they were making a big disturbance with the chairs. So some devotees went to speak to them, and the Naxalites took advantage and started shouting at the devotees, and the devotees started shouting at them, and the disturbance became worse. So we didn't know what to do. Prabhupada stopped everything, and he just started singing in the microphone. Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. And with his eyes closed, in intense absorption and love for Krishna, he began to sing the Govinda prayers, not thinking of anything else. And gradually, the Naxalites were overcome by the influence of Srila Prabhupada's devotion. And they started to become quiet. They put the chairs back in order, and they just left. So Srila Prabhupada really had complete faith in Krishna and in the holy name of Krishna, more than he had faith in his personal strength or his personal ability. And I know that when we act in the same way, depending on Krishna and Krishna's mercy, Krishna always reciprocates.
Then we asked about having children. And at that time, one of the reasons that Prabhupada married me because of my health, so it still wasn't very good. In fact, it got a little worse. So we asked about having children, and Prabhupada wrote to us that, first we asked if we could be like Bhaktivinoda Thakur and pray for a ray of Vishnu, like he did. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came as his son. So Prabhupada wrote back, we cannot imitate the Acharyas, we can only follow in their footsteps, so you shouldn't pray for a ray of Vishnu. Then, finally, the conclusion of all these children letters was that because my health wasn't good, he said, better if you both become children of Krishna rather than try to have a child for Krishna. If the mother is ill, when she's pregnant, then the baby will come out sick and will be a burden both on the child and on the parents. Then I had a lot of problems with submission, as a lot of Western-grown people did. And because Satsrup Maharaj was the editor of Prabhupada's Bhagavatams, we would get the manuscripts first. He would type and edit, so we got first before anybody on the planet. So one thing I read from the transcription was the story of Devahuti and Kardama Muni. Finished? Devahuti and Kardama Muni. And she was a great princess, but she gave up her prestige and served her husband like a menial servant. And in that passage, Prabhupada wrote that the wife shares the pious activities, pious results of the husband, if she serves him. So I wasn't too much in favor of being the recipient of somebody else's pious activities. I wanted to be the benefactor of the pious activities and take that role, take the predominant role. So I thought, well, probably this is just, ancient Vedic culture, and it doesn't apply to me. I hoped it didn't. So I wrote to Prabhupada and I quoted that verse in the Bhagavatam, and I said, I'm writing this to you for confirmation. So Prabhupada wrote back, he said, yes, it is confirmed by me that the wife is the shareholder of the husband's pious activities, so you should know that Sriman Satsarup, his life fully dedicated to Krishna, you should follow his instructions. Of course, he cannot stop or interfere with your service to me, but at least you should follow the general instructions. I realized I had to do better.
And then I started to tell him what actually happened. That I told him about Bhima's Mahaprasthan. Prabhupada heard about that, and right after that Prabhupada was planning to go for a parikrama of Govardhan, and I feel Prabhupada is actually planning to go on a Mahaprasthan himself, the final departure. And then Babaji Maharaj said, then we can't let him go. Then I said, Babaji Maharaj, the only person who can convince Prabhupada not to go is you. So Babaji Maharaj was so humble, he said, me? How can I tell him? So I said, you are the only person who can actually convince him. So then Babaji Maharaj, he just got up, washed his hands and mouth, and walked straight up to Srila Prabhupada and said, I heard everything and I feel that you should not go to parikrama. Then Prabhupada said, Babaji Maharaj, if you say so, then I will not go. And at that time, we kind of took it for granted that Srila Prabhupada came to Vrindavan to leave his body, And so around that time, Tamal Krishna Maharaj one day, he told me that we don't really know what to do if Prabhupada leaves his body. If Prabhupada left his body, we didn't know what to do. So he asked me to find out from Krishna's Babaji Maharaj. And so, I went one afternoon, late afternoon, I went to Madhav Maharaj's mat, where Krishna's Babaji Maharaj was staying. So I went, but Babaji Maharaj was not there. So waiting for him for a while, I just came back. So when I came back, Upendra Prabhu, who was Prabhupada's servant at that time, told me that Prabhupada was looking for me. So I ran into Prabhupada's room and asked him whether he wanted me to do anything. So Prabhupada asked, where did you go? Where were you? So I said, Prabhupada, I went to Madhav Maharaj's mat. So Prabhupada asked, why did you go there? I mean, his voice was ringing with anger, He said, why did you go there? And I couldn't answer, why I went there. It was, how could I say why I went there? And I was just silent, and then Prabhupada's voice kept on, rising. And he was screaming, why did you go there? So finally I said, Prabhupada, I went to see Krishna's Babaji Maharaj. And then Prabhupada's voice became even louder with anger. And he asked, why did you go there? So I finally said, Prabhupada, Tama Krishna Maharaj wanted me to go there. And then Prabhupada said, oh, I see. He became quiet. From that, I learned a lesson that Prabhupada didn't want us to go out to anybody. Although he had such a good relationship with Babaji Maharaj, still he didn't want us to go to him. And that actually, it makes it, later on I got to know, how Prabhupada said that if they say one thing different from me, then everything will be spoiled. And that's why Prabhupada didn't want us to go anywhere. He was like a caring father, who was just protecting us from any danger.
Then in Srila Prabhupada's last days, when he visited Bombay and he could just lie on the bed, nothing more, he was remembering his struggle in Juhu. And he kept trying to say something. He wanted to say something. That dog. And we couldn't understand what he meant, whether he meant Mr. N or that dog. And then finally it came out that at one stage he was staying at the house of Mr. Krishna Kapoor. And Mr. Krishna Kapoor had a big dog. And every morning he would drive Srila Prabhupada to Juhu Beach to walk, and the dog would sit next to Srila Prabhupada in the car. So Srila Prabhupada was just, when he was thinking over all that he had done to get the Juhu land, he thought of that dog, that he had to ride in a car next to a dog. So, Srila Prabhupada was not of this world. Just for him to be in the material world was such a sacrifice. But even within the material world, he made so much sacrifice just for the sake of us, the sake of the fallen souls, the sake of spreading Krishna consciousness. And I think that probably all of Srila Prabhupada's good qualities came together in the one effort to spread Krishna consciousness. And if we could just dedicate ourselves and surrender to Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission of spreading Krishna consciousness, we would also be forced to develop all good qualities and get the result or get the reward of Prabhupada's mercy. And there's nothing higher than that.
Sangsara davanandalira lokam Pranaya karina ghana ghanatyam Sapta sakalana gunarnavasya